All right, so here's 80,000 attempts of going live here on my YouTube channel.
Is in the building, North Carolina in the building, LA in the building, Louisiana, New Mexico, Nashville, Tennessee, DMV area. What up with y'all, man? San Francisco, East Belgium, St. Petersburg, Florida. You see what happened with Rod Wave? We got to talk about that. Savannah, Georgia, New Mexico, Louisville, Guadalajara, Philly, Columbus, Ohio. We got Philly in the building, man. Definitely. Southside Jamaica, Queens, Rhode Island. I like Rhode Island. My brother went to college there. Where else? Where else? South Africa in the building. Albany. Damn. Okay. Arizona. What's up with y'all, man? Shout out to everybody, man. Keep checking it. All right. So the person said they've testified all over the place, right? AUSA says we offer Dr. Hughes as an expert. The defense actually doesn't object. Say, okay, cool. AUSA says, what do you anticipate covering? Dr. Hughes says, why victims stay? Memory. AUSA says, have you been retained by the government? Dr. Hughes says, yes. What is your hourly rate? Dr. Hughes says $600 an hour, but it's $6,000 for a full day in court. So he's getting paid $6,000 per day in court. Now, someone like Dr. Hughes, you would only need him for a full day in court. It wouldn't be like 2 or 3 days. Remember, he's only to give understanding of psychological issues that probably are caused by traumatic situations, right? So AUSA says, hey, we want to know, why do victims stay? And Dr. Hughes says, well, there's psychological bonds and the psychological consequences of the abuse. He says, what are the levels of fear? Dr. Hughes says his ranges from physical violence to butterflies. Violence doesn't have to happen all the time. AUSA says, what is psychological violence? Dr. Hughes says, well, intimidation, throwing things, telling you what you could do and where you could go. The defense says objection. The judge says, hold on, I'm going to strike the last answer, okay? AUSA Mitzi Steiner, that's the one who's doing this direct, says, what can be the role of sexual abuse? Dr. Hughes says it puts the victim in a slightly psychological fear. AUSA says, why does it prevent leaving? Dr. Hughes says, shame, degradation. They don't want to think about it. AUSA says, what's emotional abuse? Dr. Hughes then says, putting down our partner, feeling like a piece of crap. AUSA says, what about financial dependence? Dr. Hughes says, the abuse control housing and transportation, taking away her laptop. Defense says objection. The judge actually sustains it. Steiner says, are you familiar with love bombing? Dr. Hughes says, that's the honeymoon phase. The abuser showers her with gifts and affection to get her back. AUSA says, does the attempt to leave happen over time? Says, yes, it takes multiple attempts. AUSA says, which is the most common coping mechanism? Dr. Hughes says, trying to work it out because of the trauma bonds. You don't want to lose your partner. AUSA says, personal coping mechanisms. How does placating and appeasing usually work? Dr. Hughes says, we're trying to avoid abuse. We're going to continue here. AUSA says, what is minimization? Dr. Hughes says, the victim says maybe they had a bad day at work. Maybe they were intoxicated. It's a way to stay in the relationship, but it increases their risk. It's not a long-term strategy. It gets from one assaultive episodes to the next. AUSA says, what about the power relation? The doctor says, a person can have power as a principal of school. The victim asks, who's going to believe me, right? AUSA says, when does the victim finally speak? Dr. Hughes says, in a safe environment, or usually after psychological help. AUSA says, what type of language do victims use when they first speak of it? Dr. Hughes, they minimize their piece, they remember the chip in the sidebar, and it's and cross-examination that's going to happen. It will be by Jonathan Bach, who's Alexander Shapiro's husband, as we said, who was brought on to be Combs' 10th attorney. Bach says, your clients, you observe them closely, their cognitive style? Hughes says, yes. Bach says, people don't fit in the boxes, right? Dr. Hughes says, they're categories. Bach says, but you have to listen to particular individuals, right? Dr. Hughes says, I'm not divorced from my training. Okay. All right, we're waiting for some more messages. Okay. Oh, man. Polished Power on Kick. He got the jokes. He said, Act, you need to update your profile picture. Look like this act ate the last act. Holy. Holy. All right. Okay. All right. So we're getting somewhere here. Fat Joe and Jadakiss call out Charlemagne. Oh shit. Joe and Jada trying to get some headlines out here. We'll see what happens. Okay. All right. Let's see.
Hey, everybody, I'm Lisa Evers, Fox 5 News reporter. I'm here outside federal.
So what's starting to happen now, chat, is like defense attorneys are like, they've gotten a pretty decent look into what this case is shaping up to be. Still pretty early. Remember, they're going to bring a lot of witnesses that might be experts, witnesses that might be, for example, we have a doctor on who's like a clinical psychiatrist, right? Or a psychologist. They're going to bring in people who are weapons experts. They're going to bring in people who are, drug experts. They're going to bring in a lot of people to kind of really crystallize this idea that Diddy may have, and they haven't really alleged that necessarily, even though it's kind of baked in the cake. They're going to try to put it where Diddy had drugs and these illicit drugs that maybe he was forcing people to take, or creating an environment where they couldn't say no and people were getting drugged and they were not on their own will. And they're going to have a lot of experts that kind of go into these type of things, but they're also going to have these behavioral experts to try to crystallize it in the minds of the jurors that what you're seeing is just not freaky people. You're seeing people who, once they fall into the cycle, like it's impossible to like get out, right?
Court, because we're getting a lot of questions, and we had to turn to one of the top lawyers in the New York City area who's actually done cases in these courtrooms and find out what everybody wants to know. Joining me right now is criminal defense attorney and managing partner of Hamilton Clark, Philip Hamilton. Phil, great to have you with us.
Always great to be with you, Lisa.
Thank you so much. One of the big questions I keep getting asked everywhere I am is, can Diddy go free?
Why they say this nigga look like Arthur, bro?
How do you answer that?
Anything is possible.
By the way, there's uneven sound coming from these mics, so like it's actually it's not fully balanced on stereo, so that's why you're gonna hear one ear if you listen on your headphone. One ear is louder than the other, so apologize for that.
Diddy could potentially go free, but if he's going to go free, the defense is going to have to continue to hammer upon the fact that this case has more to do with domestic violence than, in fact, federal sex trafficking. And if the defense can hit that home to the jury every day throughout the course of tomorrow through the rest of the trial, he might have a chance to go free. But it's going to be a very nuanced, complicated endeavor for the defense. Not easy, very much so an uphill battle.
Okay, but you're saying it's not easy for them, but a lot of people are saying all they're doing is proving domestic violence. What do they need to do? What does the prosecution need to do in order to prove sex trafficking?
Well, in order to prove sex trafficking, the prosecution has to focus on a few key elements: coercion, force, manipulation, defrauding. To the extent that they can show those elements, they can build their case and make a case for sex trafficking. So when we look at specifically the testimony that's come through from Ms. Cassie Ventura, of course, we heard a lot about force, right? And whereas a layperson might look at that testimony and say, hey, what does this have to do with sex trafficking? This has more to do with domestic violence. Well, it's a critical element, because what we do have testimony about, both from Ms. Ventura and ultimately some of the witnesses that testified today, was that there was commercial sex, right? And to the extent that you have coercion,
Meaning the
drug
sex
use,
the sex workers that they hired for these freak-offs.
Exactly. So like once you combine that element with the force, with the coercion, with the drugs, you're now starting to make a recipe for sex trafficking. Even if it isn't necessarily the strongest case, it's certainly not one that they can't prove.
So you think that the prosecution has enough to prove this? Or
As of
will
right
have
now,
yeah.
no. But if they continue building their pieces element by element, block by block, they may. We'll have to see ultimately where things are by the end of the case, how cross-examination goes with respect to a number of the remaining witnesses. But they are starting. We are only a few days in.
No, we definitely are. And then let me ask you about the RICO, the racketeering. How do you get racketeering in this whole thing? Because people are saying the main witness that they've seen is Cassie. Are they saying, is the government saying that Cassie was being trafficked by Diddy? And what about the racketeering? Explain that for us.
So it's not so much Cassie individually, right? If that was the case, then it really wouldn't be going on at this courthouse. It'd be going on at the state courthouse right across the street. Just
100
for a
Center
domestic,
Street.
100 Center Street, a typical domestic violence charge, which, based on the testimony we've heard thus far, he'd be guilty of in the state case. In this courthouse, Cassie is just simply one element upon many that the government is going to have to bring in to prove. So I think in this particular instance, it's not so much about the individual acts of violence as against her, as more as we get more of the puzzle pieces in and we get the bigger picture. And I think the bigger picture with respect to the enterprise that they're trying to prove is not much different than what we saw in the R. Kelly case, right? Where you essentially, that's the precedent for this matter, frankly. The R. Kelly case, in terms of proving an enterprise with Diddy, with his music company, and with using those apparatuses to satisfy his sexual desires.
So, for example, if they have, as we've heard, drivers for his company that were
Correct.
hired, bodyguards, were involved in transporting any of these sex workers or involved in any booking flights for them, which they testified, they were very methodical in getting Cassie to testify about this sex worker or this individual was flown from this city to that city,
Right.
and flown here and flown there, and naming the actual specific cities. Is that part of a RICO?
That's part of them trying to create the enterprise that Sean Combs was heading. And when I say that precedentially a lot of that stems from the R. Kelly case, it's because when he tried to appeal at the Second Circuit right next door to this building, the Second Circuit held that no, in fact, what R. Kelly was doing was running an enterprise, and that legally that could stand. The prosecution here is just collaterally and very much so in a parallel fashion doing the same thing. They're essentially saying that all those people that Diddy was using to allegedly bring people across state lines and the like is ultimately what manifests his intent to both sex traffic and why he's guilty of it.
Okay, but and then also, what about the drug use? Because that's one thing that's different from the R. Kelly case. Yes, there was alleged drug use and alcohol there, but this is on a whole different level from what we've been hearing in some of the testimony. The amount of drugs, the type of drugs, the different cities. What role is that going to play in terms of the government proving these charges, and what kind of problems does it present for Diddy's defense team?
Two particular problems. One, for Diddy's defense team, it's critically important to the coercion element, because to the extent that these people are not in their right minds, to the extent that they are high, to the extent that they can't make decisions on their own, it's then easier to coerce them into an act, a commercial sex act, that they may not otherwise have participated in. However, the weight of that is given by the jury in terms of looking at that evidence. That's going to be on the jury to decide. But for what the prosecution has to prove, that's one critical element. I think the second critical element with respect to the drug use is the fact that you have a lot of this coming across state lines, the fact that these are predicate other criminal acts that help to make out the RICO. Because with the RICO, to your point, you can't just look at the individual acts of domestic violence. When you're looking at the drug possession, when you're looking at the trafficking of the narcotics, that also is serving as a predicate act for the potential RICO enterprise. Very complicated, but at the end of the day, definitely trying to make the point that the government is putting their building blocks together to make their case.
So you would advise people at this point it's too early to tell, basically? Is that what you're saying?
It's too early to tell, but what they are putting into place are, number one, the elements, at least the beginning portions of the recipe that they need to make in order to prove their case. But secondly, they're making Diddy look really bad. And if there's going to be a situation where you have a couple of holdouts at the end of the case, how much empathy are they going to be able to show Diddy to continue to hold out, that he potentially gets a mistrial, or he gets them to convince other jurors to come over to his side? The worse he looks, the worse it is for him potentially in deliberations. But I repeat, not impossible.
And then what about in terms of the verdict? What needs to happen? There needs to be a unanimous verdict, or what? Explain that for us.
There needs to be a unanimous verdict on each count in order for him to be found guilty of each count. If there's one single holdout, that could be enough for a mistrial to be declared, and either for the government to have to represent their case, or potentially work out a plea negotiation with him, or do whatever it is that they're going to do at that moment, but it only takes one juror.
So the prosecution basically has to prove every single point for those 3 charges that he's facing, and the defense just has to get one juror that has serious doubts.
One juror that has serious doubts, that has the gravity with which to hold out.
And then, Phil, how important is the issue of consent in this? Because there was testimony today with Sheree Hayes, a.k.a. the Punisher, the male exotic dancer who was also a sex worker. And he was describing how Cassie seemed to enjoy having sex with him, that she seemed to be a willing partner, that he was telling by her body language. And some people were surprised. I was surprised because he was a prosecution witness, but that's something that would seem to help the defense.
No, in fact, a very good colleague of mine, Xavier Donaldson, cross-examined the Punisher, so to speak, today, and I think he did a fantastic job in laying out every...
Yo, why would you get a man named the Punisher to fuck your bitch? Well, I guess if you're into people fucking your bitch, and you get off at somebody putting in work, you would want a nigga named... I'm either, right? No. You would want a nigga named the Punisher to you know what I mean, to deliver, you know what I mean, that fucking USDA grade meat beef. You feel what I'm saying?
Everything that you just said, because for the lay public, a lot of people are looking at Cassie's testimony and saying, hey, it seems to us in many respects you were a willing participant,
right,
that you were okay with this, that you went along with this for years. And for the defense, that's a fantastically great point, and one that they're going to continue to try to hammer home. But on the other side of things, the fact remains is that she also has provided testimony that builds upon the prosecution's case of the coercion, because to the extent that she is being drugged and to the extent that she is trying to say no, but either being beaten back into it, or she is under the influence and can't really make a consensual, voluntary decision to participate or not, that's a problem for Diddy, and that's a problem for the defense team.
So what should we be watching in the days and weeks ahead? There's talk that Kid Cudi maybe come to the stand very soon. There's also talk about people who were in other freak-offs, because that's the other question I'm getting. A lot of people are saying, well, they're just talking about these freak-offs as if it's just Diddy, Cassie, and a sex worker,
right,
but there were always stories and rumors about them being bigger parties and things of that nature. What about that?
Well, let's just start with Kid Cudi, because I think therein, when I was just talking earlier about the predicate acts, when we think about the car explosion, you're dealing with an arson, that also is another element that's like coming into play when you talk about the RICO and when you talk about some of the issues that Diddy has with respect to that issue, right? I think in regards to other witnesses, what we need to be looking for is our people saying not just that I was in a one-on-one intimate relationship with Diddy the way that Cassie...
Now, I want to stop here, and I'm bringing up kind of an unrelated point, because I've seen this conversation. There's much more conversation happening of people thinking, can Diddy beat this shit, right? I think people are watching to be like, wait, that's all y'all got on this nigga? Like, I thought y'all had a little bit more. What's starting to happen as people try to, question, is Diddy going to beat it? There is also another fear of some of the people who were speaking out at first. They're almost starting to retreat back into their rat holes, because they're like, well, if Diddy beats this, he might be more powerful than ever. I actually disagree. I think he could beat it, but I don't think he'll ever get to that level of power again. There's going to be so much civil suits that fly, because what happened was a lot of this shit was kept undercover, literally, and none of this stuff came out. So also people thought it was going to be a believability issue. Also, he really had profound and tremendous impact and influence over the music industry, and people looked at him as, oh, if I get with Diddy, I could elevate my career. He was also big in the wine and spirits business. I think when Diddy comes out, if he comes out of this, without having to serve some significant jail time, or he comes out as not guilty, I don't think Diddy will have that much amount of power. I don't think so at all. I think Diddy will have his millions, but he's going to probably spend the rest of his life fighting civil cases. Everybody, you're going to probably even see more people who probably didn't say nothing before now, and people with a name come out and sue him, because then they're going to hit him up and say, we know you, dog, we know you done paid out a couple people. Give us our payout or we suing too. So I think no matter what happens, Diddy's influence and power will never return to what it used to be, or definitely won't increase. And not only that, I think he's going to probably spend the rest of his life fighting civil lawsuits. I think he'll come after him and come after him. It's going to be hell, if you ask me. So for the people who thinks this, the Thanos, I think this is one who probably for the first time in his life, if he does beat this, he's going to escape the media eye. At least, listen, Joseph Russell Goff's over there. We don't know. He probably is. When he comes out, he can't keep off the unit. He's doing. He got to go to Colombia, or he got to go to Bali.
What's in to do? I was coerced into attending parties, recalls. How that played, as circle that sounds, as I say, hear how it plays out, and then as we can have discussions about the but that's here as we kind of move forward from there.
In fact, yesterday the former read off about half of the names, and he said these were women that he was involved in. So, do you think we may see that?
We shall see, but to the extent that they do, to the extent that they are either.
Okay, by the way, I'll take pause. So Dr. Hughes was also involved in the Amber Heard trial. Let's see if we can get some testing. So this is the psychologist, right? And I want to play a little bit of what she was saying. While, if you don't know the whole trial, Johnny Depp and Amber Heard was in a relationship. Later, Amber Heard sued Johnny Depp with all type of crazy. Johnny Depp actually won. It really turned out bad for Amber Heard, because people realized that she really couldn't this whole believe women angle to pretty much gather sympathy. And in court, the truth kind of came out that this bitch was a liar. You know what I'm saying? Now, they brought in a psychologist that was able to try to break down her behavior to like the audience and the jury, that they could understand what some of this abuse that was claiming, how it could manifest in terms of action. And that's involved in the trial. Give a little bit of how she spoke in that trial, and then we'll get back to this. Again, she's on the stand current in the Diddy case.
The last time you were here, I believed that you testified that you had diagnosed Ms. Heard with PTSD before you gave the gold standard CAPS-5 test.
Correct.
And that diagnosis is actually reflected in the first of the disclosures you put forward in this case.
I believe the first disclosure was February 2021, and at that point I had done 11 psychological tests. That's correct.
Right. And your disclosure reads, Ms. Heard's responses on the PCL-5 support a DSM-5 diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder with an etiology of intimate partner violence.
Now, there was other doctors. There was a lot of doctors involved in this. There was somebody called Dr. Spiegel as well. Let me see if I could get. I don't want to play the whole thing. We wanted to. Oh, okay. So Amber Heard had an emotional outburst during her testimony. Here's this.
The symptoms that she was experiencing were related to what she experienced with Mr. Depp and not her childhood. And certainly, earlier on in the evaluation and when I evaluated and spoke with her, that was true. And that was also true on the latest measure, the clinician-administered PTSD scale for DSM-5, the CAPS-5. And that's because the content, you have to look at what is the content of the symptom. So it's not that someone says, oh yeah, something traumatic comes into my mind. No, what is it? What comes into your mind? What bothers you? What are the triggers? And those were all specific.
Yeah, you gotta be careful with Johnny Depp. Amber Heard type chick. Yo, don't she look like so innocent here?
To Miss,
like she got the victim face on, so crazy.
Heard's relationship with Mr. Depp. The reason the childhood is also significant is that we know that if somebody suffers childhood abuse as a child, they are much more likely to have an adult re-victimization. And they're much more likely then to be more vulnerable to obtaining a PTSD, to getting PTSD, if they've had that prior vulnerability. So it's a very strong vulnerability characteristic to obtaining PTSD when you have a subsequent trauma. The other aspect about her childhood abuse is that she was raised in a family of violence. She was physically abused by her father. She saw her father abuse her mother. Her father was very explosive and had violent outbursts. And both her parents also struggled with substance abuse very significantly. So she had learned from a very early age how to caretake, how to live in a situation that is mired in chaos. How do I take care of a parent who's passed out, knotted out from heroin? And how do I get up and get my sister to school? She learned at a very early age that she had to figure out how to do this.
Where's the emotional outburst
Scenario? And I would say, lastly, what that environment taught her was that
she's trying to cry.
She learned that she could love
She's
someone
trying to cry.
who hurts her. She knew that people who hurt her also can love her. And she learned how to have this tolerance for cognitive inconsistency, this tolerance for two should be diametrically opposed emotions. But she grew up knowing or believing perhaps that this could happen. And she also believed that she could fix him, just like she tried to fix her father, and just like she tried to fix her mother. She truly, truly believed that she could fix Mr. Depp and rid him of his substance abuse problems.
She's trying to get the tear to come out so bad, she blinking 30 times in a minute, bro.
But that did not work.
Did you review Dr. Curry's CAPS 5 that she administered to Amber Heard?
Yes, I did.
And what, if any, agreement did you have with Dr. Curry's interpretation of the CAPS 5?
I didn't agree with her interpretation, having been a trauma psychologist for over 25 years and administered hundreds of these. I found that there were flaws in how she chose to report it.
And
yeah, she ain't really like cried none. She ain't do too much.
You agree
Oh yeah, Johnny Depp's lawyer went crazy on Don Hughes.
with Ms. Heard that it's admirable to retreat from a fight?
Is it admirable? It is admirable to retreat from a fight.
Yeah.
I said to Travis, I said to you, hey, tell Travis what just happened.
Oh, you told me to do it. You told me to. You said, go do that.
I said, no, tell him what just
And
happened.
I lied.
And that you punched me in the thing. And
You figured it out?
All right, I'm gonna be back. I'm gonna go ahead and fix a little bit of my lag on my stream. Just make sure you hit the subscribe button, and I'll be back in just a few moments.